Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, February 16th, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And I would say, obviously, the top story today is we are in the middle of a full-court Bex. The entire corporate media is unloading on Donald Trump. They're trying to push this Russia issue as hard as they can. They've got blazing headlines about what a terrible thing this is. And then if you actually read down in there, they say, well, this is just what we're being told by these unnamed anonymous intelligence officials who have to remain anonymous because blah, 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 blah. So there really is no story there. It is a headline without substance. It's a smear job is what it is. The deep state, the corporate media, the CIA, the cocaine cartel, whatever you want to call them, they are out to smear and destroy Donald Trump because they are afraid that once he finds out what's really been going on in this country for the last 30 years, he's going to scrape out the federal government like a hollow gourd and start all over from scratch here. So we're seeing articles like this one here in the Daily Mail in Great Britain, Donald Camp's hotline to Moscow. Explosive phone records and intercepted calls show Trump aides and campaign staff repeatedly contact Russian intelligence officers in the year before the election, and the candidate was briefed. And this is all being sourced out of the New York Slimes. But even the Slimes said that their source for all of this were interviews it carried out with 4 current and former American officials. In other words, the New York Slimes has not seen these records, has not listened to the intercepts. They're going solely on the word of these intelligence officials who have openly declared war on the President of the United States, not to mention democracy itself. I mean, it is really out there and over the top. Now, Chuck Schumer is being quoted in The Hill as saying there's a possible cover-up by the Trump administration over their contacts with the government of Russia. And he's out there screaming they're going to destroy evidence, they're going to destroy evidence. Boy, where were all these strident demands for investigation when Hillary Clinton was engaged in her corruptions? Now, the example we've got here, this is over at Ross Story. U.S. allies also intercepted contacts between Trump campaign and Russian operatives. And, of course, buried inside, these sources spoke on condition that they not be identified because they were not formally authorized to disclose the information. This is a smear job, plain and simple. And the FBI has already said their investigation showed no collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. Remember when they were doing the headlines about Russia's interfering in the German elections, and the German intelligence services investigated. They couldn't find anything either. And to show you how desperate they are, they actually dragged Dan Rather out of retirement to come on out and say Trump's Russian scandal could be bigger than Watergate. And it's just, and he said, we must do all that. And of course, if you can't trust the man who lied to all of America about the Kennedy assassination, who can you trust? Now, Donald Trump has had his first solo press conference and just uncorked and fired back saying, you guys are just making this stuff up. And he's responding to a Wall Street Journal that claims America's intelligence agencies are purposely withholding information about Russia from Donald Trump out of fear that it will be sent to Vladimir Putin. I mean, this is just getting to ridiculous attempts. Now, Democrats in Congress are screaming they want a probe into Donald Trump and the Russia link, but Attorney General Jeff Sessions has to be kept out of it. Why? Do they think an Attorney General might interfere with an investigation into corruption? I can't imagine why they would think that would be a possibility. Right, Loretta? Now, then we have this other article that came out of Raw Story about how a former CIA official says having Trump in the White House is the gravest threat since the Civil War. And he's quoted as saying, we are facing the gravest threat to our institutions and our government since 1861, since the country broke in half. This is coming from Glenn Carl, who served as a deputy officer in the National Intelligence Council. Now, from his point of view at the CIA, yeah, Trump is a threat because of what the CIA has been doing. And this, again, this all goes back, among many other crimes, but the one we're talking about here is that Operation Screwworm operated out of Arkansas in the mid-1980s that was manufacturing untraceable military weapons and sending them down to Nicaragua to use against the Contras. And because this was a violation of the Boland Amendment in the Logan Act, they were funding it all by smuggling tons of cocaine back into the United States of America to sell to your children, under the watchful eye and protection of then-Governor Bill Clinton, all under the direction of then-Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush. That's where all of the last 30 years of crime and corruption was born. And from the CIA's point of view, Trump is a threat to their institution. And they're very, very scared. They got to get him out there before he actually starts to learn what's been going on here. Now, Trump is out there saying that intelligence agencies and the media are using this fake Russian connection to distract from and cover up Hillary Clinton's crimes. He thinks they're going on the offensive against him, so he cannot go on the offensive against Hillary Clinton. He's only partially right. But he points out correctly, we had all this evidence of corruption. We had the head of the FBI actually saying Hillary Clinton committed Title 18 violations. Why did they get a free pass on all of this? But again, this is another example of what I see as Trump's dangerous naivete, because his worldview is made up mostly of what he's been seeing on TV, movies, and the corporate media, almost all of which is a complete fantasy. Trump apparently doesn't yet know about that gun and cocaine running that led to the Iran-Contra scandal and how it is the launching point for the Bush and Clinton's rise to the duocracy or duopoly. And the CIA are going to do whatever they take to protect themselves from having to go to prison. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And here's the part that Trump needs to realize. Remember, Donald Trump went over, he did a speech at the CIA, we're going to remove the columns, we're going to make things better. And Donald Trump does not yet understand. The CIA will not help Donald Trump end corruption in the U.S. government because the CIA is the source of the corruption. With all that drug running, and it wasn't just Arkansas, they were bringing heroin back from Vietnam and using it to fund off-the-shelf, non-approved by Congress covert operations. Now, here's a very optimistic article in the Daily Caller. U.S. government drug smuggling agency spanning the Clinton, Shrub, and Obama administrations doesn't last long under the Trump administration. Yes, that's what we want to see happen, and that's why those critters in that swamp are fighting back. It's one thing to drain the swamp. It's another thing to try and remember you're there to drain the swamp when you're up to your rear end in alligators trying to bite off parts of your body. Or to eat your lieutenants bit by bit, which is what just happened to Mike Flynn. Now remember, only last January, Chuck Schumer was on Rachel Maddow's program, and he said the intelligence community of the United States of America is going to declare war on the President of the United States. In a very real way, we are seeing a virtual, abstracted civil war already in place in this country. It's being fought in the media. It's being fought online. I certainly hope we can keep it there, but virtual, abstracted civil wars have a really bad habit of turning into real, bloody, in-the-street civil wars. I'm not the only person who's saying that. EndOfTheAmericanDream.com has exactly the same headline. A civil war for control of the U.S. government has erupted between the deep state and Donald Trump. Go back and read your Constitution. We, the people, are supposed to be the ultimate control over the U.S. government. Clearly the CIA has gone rogue. Clearly the entire intelligence community has gone rogue. And we know how the corporate media has been compromised by the CIA going back to at least the end of World War II through the CIA's Operation Mockingbird. Remember when Sally Denton and Roger Morris had put together a story about all this government-sanctioned drug running out of Mena, Arkansas. And they had a lot of the information everybody had thought had disappeared with the assassination of cocaine pilot, CIA pilot Barry Seal. And they had recovered it all. And they wrote the story. They took it to the Washington Post. It was fact-checked by the Washington Post's own lawyers and cleared for publication and was spiked by Washington Post managing editor Bob Kaiser, who also happens to be a fellow Skull and Bones alumni with George Bush. ultimately the article was published in Penthouse magazine, and it told a very, very dark story about just how badly corrupted our federal government is with drug money. And, of course, the corporate media said, well, if it's in Penthouse, I mean, why would you pay attention to that? Just go look at the naked ladies and don't read all that stuff about how our government is involved in drug smuggling. We really, it's such a kooky thing to be thinking about here. Dennis Kucinich has gone public, saying the intelligence community is making every effort they can to upend Donald Trump. They are, in effect, in a state of rebellion against the lawful authority of the United States of America. They are committing treason against the Constitution, against the American people. And they are a danger. And the big issue is they want these wars with Russia and China, or at least a Cold War, so they can bleed the American people to buy weapons that don't really work, and it doesn't matter because they're never really going to be used. It's all just big booga booga, give us your money, we'll protect you from the evil Russians, just like they did in the 1950s and 1960s. The real danger, the real gamble they're taking in an age of a much more aware and skeptical general population, if the deep state starts a war, it may very well wind up aimed at them instead of at the designated victims. Now, William Crystal is out there tweeting saying that he would rather the deep state take over the nation than allow President Trump and the legitimate government of this country to continue. He's fully on board with this idea of taking down the legitimate government of the United States and replacing it with some kind of a junta. So we know which side he is on. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Bob in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I have to second what some of the callers said yesterday about Robert David Steele. Trump should bring him into his administration. I would love to see a guy like Robert David Steele or Pat Buchanan as Trump's chief of staff. I mean, that would greatly counter his naivete. And these are guys that are insiders, or at least Buchanan was an insider, who's in many ways an outsider, but who know how Washington operates. He would be ideal, but I don't think Trump would ever have either of the two as chief of staff, but I would love to see it happen. But also, did you see that tweet from that former NSA official referring to one of his friends in the intelligence community saying Trump will die in jail? Yeah,
that's been all over the web. It's been all over the independent media. I mean, that's really, really tough talk. And the only way Donald Trump is...
stuff.
Yeah, they're talking about literally overthrowing the government of the United States of America and throwing Trump in prison. I mean, the intelligence community is in open rebellion against the United States of America. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. Mike, just quickly, on this cashless society you were talking about yesterday, this also would have an impact on contributions to independent media. If that should happen, that could easily those transfers could easily be denied by the central authorities. They could just say, "Oh, sorry, this independent media is terroristic, or it's a dangerous outfit that promulgates fake news, so we have to deny this transfer of funds."
Well, they could do that pretty much right now if they felt they could get away with it, because it's not like anybody walks up to my door, knocks on it, and hands me a suitcase full of cash. I'm getting donations, through bank checks and through the PayPal transfers. So if they were going to take that drastic step, they're actually in a position to do it now.
But I think it would be a lot easier if the cashless society came into effect.
Well, I agree with you, unless the computers for the cashless society are programmed by the same people who did the Obamacare website, in which case we're all going to be in a lot of trouble.
Oh, Mike, last, you mentioned how Claire's credit card was, that information was compromised.
Yes.
You said a year ago while you were shopping. Is that, I just purchased one of these, I think it's RTI or REI wallets. Does that protect any of my cards that have these chips in them? Because it claims to do so. Yeah, they really will work. It's basically, it's a wallet with a built-in Faraday cage. And it will limit, because those chips are very low power. In fact, the chips actually get the power to transmit from the incoming signal. That's why there's no battery or anything in there. So if the signal
hits your wallet and doesn't get on through, then the chip on the card will never activate.
Okay, because the wallet feels like a typical leather wallet. I don't feel anything in terms of any difference.
Well, all it takes is a very fine metal mesh, and I imagine there might be some. Well, there's an easy way to test it. Go out and make a purchase and just swipe the wallet over the terminal and see if the credit card registers. And if it doesn't, then obviously the wallet is working.
Okay, very good. All right, Mike, thank you again for your brilliant work. I cannot overstate it enough how much I appreciate your work, you and Claire's work. And I don't even watch the news. I get all my news from your broadcast.
Well, thank you very much for those very kind words. I appreciate it, and you're very welcome, and we're going to keep on doing it just as long as we possibly can, or as long as is necessary. I mean, I can be very, very honest. Back in 1994, when I got kicked out of Hollywood over the Vince Foster affair, I figured I'd start this blog, I'd put some stuff out there, there'd be another Watergate-type hearing, somebody would resign, that would be the end of it, and I could go back to being, working in movies and everything. And I, to be very honest, never dreamed it would continue for all these years, and now we're looking at a situation where it doesn't look like there really is any end in sight unless the government does actually go through a Soviet Union-style collapse. That's
Hollywood's great loss and our great gain.
Well, I appreciate that, but, there are other things I'd much rather be doing than this, but I do appreciate the thought.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. This is definitely a declared war by the intelligence community and probably the Defense Department as well. But probably, we don't know that for sure. Intelligence, definitely. But I was shocked at the Jared Kushner, George Soros link that is being, at least people are alleging. And I wanted to hear what you had to say about that.
Well, I've been watching all this stuff, this fury start to build around George Soros, and there's one thing that we need to be very aware of, and that is, for a man of his wealth, Soros is pretty much linked to everybody, not all of which may indicate nefarious intent on the part of both parties. Soros is still making money with which to play his other games with. It's not like he's got a magic goose laying his golden eggs or anything. And it's like when Donald Trump was first campaigning, they're saying, well, Donald Trump's met this person and Donald Trump's met that person. Well, at that level of society, everybody pretty much meets everybody is on a first-name basis. So it's not enough to say this person knows this person. You have to take the next step and actually document the compromising connection and not just merely imply that Donald Trump is going to do this because he was seen having coffee with this other person.
Well, it's not Trump I'm worried about. It's Kushner.
Yes. No, but the same thing applies. We need to find out how is Kushner being influenced by George Soros. Is he being influenced? Quite probably. Or rather, it's being tried at least. But we need to find out what is actually happening here. Right now, one of the things I'm finding most alarming about the independent media is it is giving way to more and more guessing and speculation. And of course, that's what got Webster Tarpley into trouble. And I think we need to go the other way. We need to be more cautious. I'm going to be a lot more cautious. It's not enough to say person X and person Y have a link. Well, it's like the situation with Trump talking with people in Russia prior to running for president. He had business interests there, and it would be perfectly acceptable for him to be conducting business and being in communication with people inside Russia. So we need to actually find out the entire substance. We need to go back to those 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and why, and answer all of those before we say we've got something that's worth talking about. Should we continue looking? Yes. Do we have anything solid yet? I'm not feeling it. Anyway, listen, Peter, thanks an awful lot. Got to let you go. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, something rather interesting to look at. Just before he left office, President Obama very quietly expanded the NSA's ability to spy on innocent Americans and basically authorized them to just share whatever they found with anybody else they felt like. Previously, there had been restrictions where this information the NSA was stealing could go to, and now it appears that this is in large part what is being used against President Trump. Now, Lou Dobbs is out there saying that Obama is getting very close to the edge of sedition and high treason. And he goes back about, where former President Obama was saying he was heartened by the anti-Trump protests. That could be construed as sending a message of approval, saying, yes, agitate, try and cause chaos. It's time for Donald Trump to really start cleaning house and get rid of those Obama holdovers. Because if, in fact, Obama is one of the ringleaders of this attempt to stage some kind of a color revolution, bring down the legitimate elected government of the United States of America and replace it with a junta. And by the way, Michael Moore wants Hillary Clinton installed in charge of that junta. That'll make the hair go up on the back of your neck. Trump's going to have to act decisively. Trump needs to realize just what it is he's up against. Now, to show you how desperate they are against Donald Trump, do you remember during the campaign, the corporate media made a big deal over the fact that Donald Trump's father, Fred Trump, had been arrested at a riot caused by the KKK. And the story was he was arrested and immediately released. The story didn't even say he was a member of the KKK. In fact, there was no indication that he was anywhere other than just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this was all 9 years before Donald Trump was born, and they were making a big deal. See, the family's got racist roots and everything. So they're back to that one again. The FBI has released files on a race discrimination probe into the Trump apartments under the control of Fred Trump. Not Donald Trump, Fred Trump. That there may have been racial discrimination in the letting of apartments to people in the 1970s, which, sadly, tragically, was in fact common back there. But you know something? It really doesn't matter what the father does. It shouldn't. When John F. Kennedy was running for the White House, when Robert F. Kennedy was running for the White House, when Teddy Kennedy was running for the White House, nobody brought up old Joe Kennedy's links to organized crime and rum running, did they? There's sort of a tradition in this country. The crimes of the parents do not follow the children. But in this case, they're just trying to find whatever they can. And they're reaching back into the 1970s for anything they can use as ammunition here. Now then, as you know, Donald Trump has a new National Security Advisor, Robert Harwood. And his way of stopping the leaks is he's cleaning out his part of the White House staff. They're all getting their pink slips. They're not going to bother and try and find who actually was the leaker. All the Obama holdovers are gone. He's bringing in his own staff he knows he can trust. And that's an important first step. Donald Trump should have done that day one in the White House. He was trying to be magnanimous and generous by allowing the Obama holdovers to stay there. And for certain things like, the cooks and the domestic staff, who cares? But obviously, he allowed people to remain on the staff who were not loyal to him, who were loyal to the liberal agenda, to the globalists, to the New World Order. Now, speculation is still running around over exactly what was behind the political assassination of Michael Flynn. And was it just this idea that he talked to the Russian ambassador? Was it this misrepresentation to the vice president? Probably not. One of the big issues is that Michael Flynn was not on board with the globalist New World Order agenda. In fact, his attitude basically was the United States needs to mind its own business. It's not our job to save the world. And that may have been one of the reasons why he was targeted for removal. Because certainly from George Soros' point of view, if he can't get rid of an anti-globalist Donald Trump, he can pare down the anti-globalist staff of the White House. And that may be what's going on. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And adding insult to injury and signaling that Mike Flynn's career is over, at least officially, he's had his security clearance revoked. All on the basis of unfounded rumors and a smear job. But the intelligence community has declared war on Trump and anybody that is cooperating with Trump, and so this is just another form of that. Now, interestingly enough, considering that it is the Democratic Party that is always in favor of raising taxes to have money to spend on illegal immigrants and refugees and transgender bathrooms and human-caused global warming, now they are mounting a campaign for a tax boycott against the Trump administration. They're trying to get all the Democrats to refuse to file and pay taxes this year. This is from a report in The Guardian, and it'll be interesting to see how much traction they get on that one. Now, complying with his campaign promise to try and control spending, Donald Trump's White House is already showing a lot of signs. He's basically browbeat a lot of these military contractors into lowering price on some of these systems they're delivering, many of which don't really work anyway. And the same is also happening to the office of the First Lady. And again, you need to remember, there really is no constitutional office of First Lady. It's a courtesy title only. Now, when Michelle Obama was the First Lady, she had a staff of 20 employees. That's a large staff for an unelected position with no official duties whatsoever. And those were all very highly paid positions. Our current First Lady, Melania, has only hired 2 people, a chief of staff and an events planner. And that may be it. Now, as I mentioned in passing before, Michael Moore is out there calling for Donald Trump to be arrested and for Hillary Clinton to be installed as President of the United States of America. And he's out there screaming about Trump's contacts with Russia. Russia interfered with the election. And again, the FBI's investigated. They found nothing. And he's out there screaming, bring down the current government, make Hillary the Empress. And I would remind Mr. Moore of Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 2385, advocating the overthrow of government will get you locked up in prison. So maybe you ought to be thinking about your next documentary is going to be Bubba and Me, or something along that line. You did a wonderful job on doing a report about the prisons in Norway, but you were on the outside at that time. Maybe your next documentary will be a look at America's prison system from inside, and that will be quite a colorful thing. Now, here's the point I want to make. Freedom of speech is actually clarified within the First Amendment itself. The right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances without fear of that government reprising because you assembled peacefully and said, hey, we don't like what you're doing. That's it. Freedom of speech does not protect you when you're out there calling for revolution, when you're rioting in the streets, breaking windows in the Starbucks. And freedom of speech does not protect you from violations of U.S. law that say calling for the overthrow of the government, calling for the assassination of the president. I'm amazed at all these people talking about Trump should be assassinated. They should be arrested in jail. Now, for the last almost 2.5 decades, had a lot of problems with the government. But you have to try and work within that system to try and get the system to correct itself. Now, I got some email the other day saying, well, how can you be criticizing all these people about, wanting to bring down the government when you've been talking about the government coming on down? Well, there's a difference between passive and active. Passive is when I say I fear that the U.S. government, if it does not change course, will go through a collapse much like this former Soviet Union. And I'm still of that opinion, by the way. That's a passive comment. An active comment is if I'm out there with a flaming torch and a pitchfork saying, kill them all, let God sort them out. Now, do you remember when they were trying to massage former Iranian President Ahmadinejad's words, and the headlines were Ahmadinejad says, I want to wipe Israel off the face of the map? That's an active comment. But it turns out it was a mistranslation by memory. The Middle East Media Research Institute, which is now known to be an Israeli propaganda front. What Ahmadinejad actually said is Israel will eventually vanish from the pages of history. That is a passive comment. And there is the difference. When you have Michael Moore out there saying, arrest Donald Trump, bring down our current system, install Hillary Clinton, that's a very active call for the overthrow of the United States government. Certainly when Trump had won the election, I held out a hope that we could, working within the system, turn things around and start that long, slow trip back to being a constitutional republic with a democratically elected government by virtue of honest, unriggable, fully transparent elections. At this point, it doesn't look like the deep state wants that. The deep state is still pushing for a fascist economic dictatorship. They're still pushing for a new world order and global government. The difference is now everybody sees them do it. Remember years ago I made this comment, it's on one of the coffee cups you can buy from our store. The fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it, and that is exactly what's going on right now. Americans are waking up and saying, wait a minute, these intelligence agencies are supposed to be working for the executive branch, not declaring war on it over who's in charge. And certainly anybody who's a student of the Kennedy assassination understands that was a big part of what was going on back then as well. Now, a little bit of good news we can all celebrate. A formal complaint has been filed with the Federal Elections Commission against the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. The Public Interest Legal Foundation is an Indiana-based law firm that litigates ballot box integrity lawsuits. And they filed their complaint with the FEC arguing that agents from the Democracy Partners and the Foval Group, the persons who were caught on James O'Keefe's undercover videos, were engaging in public communications, campaign activity, targeted voter registration drives, and other targeted get-out-the-vote activity at the request, direction, and approval of Hillary for America, which is the official name of the Clinton campaign, and the Democratic National Committee. And when all these people were being caught, when these O'Keefe videos first came on out, we were pointing out, this is a violation of the law. Anytime we said there needs to be arrest, what did we get from Hillary's campaigns? Oh, you're being sexist. You just don't want to have a woman as a president. Of course, my reply is, I don't have a problem with a woman as a president. I have a problem with that particular individual as president. If Tulsi Gabbard runs for president, I'm going to support her. If those of you who want a woman president, get a candidate that you can actually get behind. Tulsi Gabbard. I would absolutely, without question, support her. Especially after what she did over there in Syria. That took courage. Took a degree of courage we just do not see in present-day Washington, D.C., where looking in the dark and stabbing in the back is the dominant mode of social interaction. Now, Donald Trump is basically declaring war on these low-life leakers who he feels justly have betrayed him because in the course of doing the business of the White House, there are going to be discussions back and forth. IDs will be proposed. Some will be rejected and dropped. But if you take these ideas that are being rejected and dropped and you leak them to the media can take them and turn them into something very, very dark. And Sean Spicer was absolutely correct in today's press conference saying this is what the corporate media should be reporting on, not this very tenuous claim that Russia somehow interfered with the U.S. election to work against Hillary Clinton, even though all the detected election fraud favored Hillary Clinton. But the media should be looking at all cases where classified information is being leaked out by government officials. And, of course, that was a left-handed reminder that the corporate media turned an absolute blind eye to the scandal of Hillary Clinton's weak email server on which were parked some of the nation's most closely guarded secrets. And we know that server was penetrated by at least 10 foreign governments. At the same time, huge volumes of money were pouring in to the Clinton Foundation. And the corporate media gave them a complete pass. And here's where you begin to see the arrogance of the corporate media, where they think they're really something special, that there's something superior. Because after all these months of comparing Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler, to Genghis Khan, to Cthulhu, to Satan himself, and now the journalists are upset that Spicer is not calling on them first for questions. He's going to the back of the room, to the smaller media, to the more independent media. And the corporate media's attitude is, well, of course we called you all those bad names. That's what we're being paid to do. But that's no reason for you not to go on favoring us in these press conferences. It's a very high degree of accuracy. And here's a good one. Bannon supposedly walked past a group of corporate media news reporters, and he just quipped, the opposition party all lined up, which is kind of funny. And the reporters just went ballistic, saying, he's insulted us, he's insulted us, oh my goodness. Well, those poor corporate media snowflakes, so easily wounded. I mean, if you're that fragile, you shouldn't be working in the media. Because any media, any entertainment, I've been there, it's a hostile environment. Whining and crying bunch of sissies. They really are. Alrighty, and at this point, it seems like a good idea to remind everybody, once again, of the CIA's Operation Mockingbird, which was a program by the CIA to deliberately subvert and bring under their control the entire corporate media. It goes all the way back to the end of World War II, where even though we were all told Hitler was a bad guy and everything the Nazis did was terrible, the U.S. government, through Operation Paperclip, were grabbing all these Nazis and saying, wow, how did you do what you did? We want to do that here. And one of those was how adroitly the Nazi propaganda apparatus had compromised Germany's free press of the day. And they started emulating those same things. And I love some of the quotes that come out of this. You could get a journalist cheaper than a good call girl for a couple of $100 a month. This was a CIA operative discussing with Philip Graham, the editor of the Washington Post, on the availability and prices of journalists willing to peddle CIA propaganda and cover stories. This is in the book Catherine the Great by Deborah Davis, New York Sheridan Press, 1991. William Colby, former CIA director, before he took his canoe trip, said the Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the corporate media. Well, he said major media, but we're updating it here. So that's basically it. The corporate media is under the direct control of the Central Intelligence Agency. Their job is to brainwash you into thinking everything is hunky-dory, that you still have honest elections, that you still have healthy medicines in the store, that the food in the supermarkets is safe to eat. That's their job. Remember when this whole fake news kerfuffle first erupted, and I said the corporate media is trapped by their own business model. They're not paid those multi-million-dollar paychecks to tell you the truth. They're paid those multi-million-dollar paychecks to be very convincing liars. If they were to start telling the truth, those million-dollar paychecks would vanish overnight. Now, there's another article. This is over at Natural News. The New York Slimes has committed treason by using fake news to overthrow the United States government. Now, remember, the New York Slimes, when this whole Russia thing came on, they were printing quotes from what they claimed was a Twitter feed belonging to Mike Flynn. And it turned out it was a fraudulent Twitter feed that was putting out quotes, misquotes, and even Nancy Pelosi is still using them. And the Times was forced to edit that out from their online version of the story. And Natural News says it's time to start arresting these traitors who pretend to be journalists. Well, we don't even call them journalists anymore. We call them prostitutes and correspondents. And the older media is very much definitely in trouble. Back in 2011, the Huffington Post warned that Fox Business News would need 69 years to ever dream of overtaking CNBC. And just 6 years later, Fox Business has overtaken CNBC for 4 months in a row. A big part of that may have to have been from when CNBC, when this scandal over the gold in the New York Federal Reserve first erupted, they actually ran an editorial saying it didn't matter if the physical gold was still there or not. As long as we had a bookkeeping entry saying it was there, it was all perfectly okay for the purposes of managing international finance. In other words, the gold is there. As long as you don't actually ask for it, everything is fine. CNBC actually took that position. Now, one of the things I have been hoping to see is the corporate media get a clue that in the long run, they're not going to be able to go back to the way things were. And again, the parallel I like to draw is when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing and books became affordable to the middle class. And there was a very furious war back then between people who wanted to learn the truth and the rulers who wanted to maintain control over what people thought and believed. And there's a lot of parallels with what's going on now. Eventually, obviously, printing prevailed. And those institutions that could evolve and adapt to the new reality survived, and those that could not went extinct. And so now NBC has broken ranks with the rest of the corporate media and is saying that there is no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. NBC's Pete Williams is out there tweeting, investigators have found no collusion whatsoever. They're not burying this at the bottom of an article with an inflammatory headline. NBC is clearly trying to distance themselves from this disaster that is the rest of the corporate media, and they will succeed. Right now, I would give very good odds on NBC still being around after CBS, ABC, PBS, Fox, CNN are gone. Because they're doing the right thing. They're understanding the need to evolve and adapt to the new environment of a much more skeptical population who have their own sources of information. So, good for NBC. All righty. Now then, getting on over to the war zones, President Bashar al-Assad, even though Assad has got reasons to be very angry with the United States of America, certainly the preceding administrations, he's out there publicly backing Donald Trump over the temporary travel ban from selected countries. And Assad is saying, this is not against the Syrian people. This is clearly an attempt to provide security for the American people against terrorists. Assad has admitted many of the people leaving Syria for the United States have records for terrorism. And Trump is doing the right thing in the view of Syria's President Assad. But you're never going to see that on the corporate media. All right, we've got to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, Donald Trump made an interesting comment the other day where he wants to have good relations with Russia, but he's expecting Russia to give Crimea back to Ukraine. Now, the two really don't go together. And this is why I think what's really going on here is that Trump has told Putin not to worry about it, because Trump is trying to convince the war hawks in the Senate that he's really on their side about bloodshed all over the world long enough to get the rest of his appointments confirmed, including the Supreme Court judge. Because the two statements don't really go together. But Moscow has come on out basically saying, no, we're not going to give it back. And their reasoning is very simple. We didn't take it. Crimea asked to become part of us. Which is, in fact, exactly what happened. And the U.S. government's rationale is, we don't recognize the right of the Crimean people to vote themselves free from our junta and to vote themselves part of Russia. Therefore, since we don't recognize the referendums by default, Russia has stolen Crimea. Now, that's like a guest at a wedding saying that they don't recognize the bride's right to choose the groom. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's the way the logic is kind of unfolding on all of this. So everybody, the war hawks are out there saying, see, Russia's bad, Russia's bad, Russia's doing things. Now, before we all start seeing the mushroom clouds popping up all over, little bit of things from history that you need to remember. First of all, Russia has never initiated an attack on the West, ever. Now, I put that out someplace earlier, and I got a reply back saying, well, didn't Russia attack Poland? Well, Russia was aligned with Germany, and Germany attacked Poland. Remember, the key word here is initiated. Russia has never initiated an attack on the West, ever. Now, the charter that transferred Crimea from Turkey to Russia clearly states that if Russia ever loses Crimea, it goes back to Turkey. Now, during World War II, Russia defended Crimea against a lot of outside invaders, including the British. Now, Soviet law required Parliament to approve Khrushchev's gift of Crimea to Ukraine. Remember, Khrushchev himself was from Ukraine, and he said, I'm going to give you Crimea. But he couldn't do that. The law in the Soviet Union said Parliament would have to validate that, to approve it. It's just like with a treaty here in the United States of America. The president can sign all the treaties he wants. Until the Senate ratifies it, it doesn't apply. So under the letter of the law, Crimea never was a part of Ukraine to begin with. Now, for any of the war hawks who are out there who think that Russia's going to be easy prey You need to reread Napoleon and Hitler, and then look into the cost-performance ratios of the F-35, the F-22, the Gerald R. Ford, the Zumwalt, the Independence-class littoral combat ship, the Freedom-class littoral combat ships. And how about a little gratitude here? Because remember, when France and Britain thought about invading the United States in support of the Confederacy, it was Russia that held them in check. I think we owe them a little debt of gratitude on that one. We have to take a break for station identification. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, here is a development in the war area, and this may put James Matisse in the line of fire next to follow Michael Flynn, because Matisse is now warning Europe, you must start paying for your own defense, or the United States will moderate its NATO spending. In other words, if you're all afraid of a Russian invasion, you need to pick up the tab. Now, for the other NATO nations, that's a raw deal, because the only reason they've been going along with all this Russia is evil nonsense is they've been promised some big bucks and lots of free weapons and all kinds of goodies. And so I would wager a nickel that James Matisse is now going to be targeted for political assassination to get rid of him. Because if Soros cannot get rid of the anti-globalist President Trump, he is going to start bringing down Trump's anti-globalist lieutenants. And that does seem to be what's going on. Now, when I was talking about how Assad is supporting President Trump in this travel moratorium against 7 specific countries, I said Assad has reasons to be unhappy with the U.S. And there's another one right now. The Pentagon is getting ready to try and convince Donald Trump that it's time to send U.S. conventional ground troops into northern Syria to fight the Islamic State. This is a Defense Department official telling CNN on Wednesday. Now, this is a load of USDA choice bovine excrement for 2 reasons. First of all, Russia and Syria are pretty much on the verge of winning that war, which of course is not what the United States wants to have happen, because the United States has been trying to oust Assad for 5 years with whatever excuse they could come up with. Okay, Assad has weapons of mass destruction, just like Saddam did. Assad gassed his own people. Okay, maybe Assad isn't bad, but ISIS is. We have to go in and attack them. Assad has tortured and killed 13,000 people, and now we're back to we need to get the ISIS terrorists. But the important part to remember is, while Syria has requested Russia's help to deal with the often U.S.-backed terrorists in Syria, and Russia has permission by the Syrian government to be operating inside Syria's territorial waters, airspace, and on the ground, the United States does not have an invitation from the government of Syria. The United States does not have permission from the government of Syria to be inside Syria for any reason whatsoever. And so far, all the U.S. attacks supposedly on ISIS inside Syria always seem to miss ISIS and hit critical Syrian infrastructure and hospitals. Always dismissed as an honest mistake by the United States. We didn't mean to blow up that oil refinery and that water treatment plant. Really, these mistakes happen, and if you think there's anything else going on, you're just a wacko tinfoil hat-wearing wingnut kook. Now then, over in Germany, a top German politician, Horst Metz, Saxony's former finance minister, has resigned from the Christian Democratic Union. That's Angela Merkel's party. And he's saying she's the reason. And he basically said when Merkel came on out explaining why she was going to try and run again to be chancellor, he said that was it, the final straw. So he's out. Things are looking very, very bad for Angela Merkel to the point where no amount of election fraud is going to be able to save her. Merkel has now been forced to officially deny and walk back that Germany is planning to start building their own nuclear weapons. We were hearing this last week where Germany was just appalled at the lack of support against Russia, and they were going to take it upon themselves. Reminds me of an old Tom Lehrer song, the MLF Lullaby, and there's one verse in there that goes, once all the Germans were warlike and mean, but that couldn't happen again. We taught them a lesson in 1918, and they've hardly bothered us since then. Now, over in other parties here, we have Geert Wilders, and the polls are showing him leading the Dutch election. And there's a new term of craft that is spreading all over Europe. It's called the Patriotic Spring. Not the Arab Spring, not the Russian Spring, the Patriotic Spring, the surge of nationalism and sovereignty. And his election is coming up on March 15th, and if he wins, they're saying this is the start of the Patriotic Spring. It could almost make Marine Le Pen's victory a footnote, because it could start to unravel as early as this time next month, and I think it would be a good thing. We've all suffered enough under George Soros' delusions of grandeur, and I think it's time to bring it to an end. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you.
Aloha.
I'll tell you what. Yesterday you made a comment or touched upon something that caught my attention and intriguing, and I mentioned about it to my hubby, and he's like, well, if you come across further information about it, pass it by me so I'll know what's legitimate about it or not. Whenever you're doing your tax filing, and in that tax filing they ask you whether or not you had or do currently have health care coverage, so that way the IRS knows how to deal with you and so forth. There was something, I don't want to say alluded to, but a commentary made to the effect that you do or do not have to check off that box or whatever.
That's what we're hearing. The stories that we had were reporting that the IRS, responding to Donald Trump's executive order to not penalize Americans for this Obamacare situation, they're basically saying they will accept your tax return with that line left blank. You don't have to check the box or anything. They will accept the tax return and proceed forward from that. Of course, the issue of the Obamacare is still very much up in the air. Part of the problem appears to be that too many Republicans are themselves invested in these same health insurance companies. And I would say that when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, I love the idea of a president having all their wealth in a complete blind trust. I think it should apply to all members of the legislature and all appointed government officials as well. And if they're not willing to do that, well, then they should basically refuse to serve in public service. Because the amount, the opportunities for personal profiting are just immense. Members of Congress have access to private information that they can use to their advantage in their investments. They actually, now technically, insider trading is illegal anyway, but there was actually an effort to try and pass a bill making it even more illegal for members of Congress to engage in insider trading, and to nobody's surprise, that one was voted down to destruction.
Indeed. Quick question. Is there a page or a site online that has to deal with that filing or not filing or whatever the case is that has to do with that executive order or whatever? You
could go down on whatreallyhappened.com and just scroll on down, and it may have already gone over to yesterday's page, and you can find it there and start to track it back from there, or otherwise a Google search. I don't have a site for that actually memorized at the moment. But start with the articles that are talking about it and see what their sources are, and move on back up the line. I would advise you, I would advise you to call the IRS's own helplines on this issue, but unfortunately, apparently 1/3 of the information handed out from the IRS's own helplines tends to be false. Or let me rephrase that, mistaken, erroneous.
Well, there's that too. However, I'd rather use Startpage or some other mode of search engine other than Google or what do you want to call it, or Goggle.
Okay, well, Startpage is a good one. I'm still using Yandex with good success.
There you go. Have a good one. Thanks again.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. And now we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who have just now rejoined our network. Yesterday, of course, there was this joint press conference between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, in which there appeared to be offered a quid pro quo where Donald Trump said, I will make sure Iran does not get nuclear weapons, and then he turned to Netanyahu and said, I would encourage you to pull back on the settlement issue. And it was a brilliant deal for Donald Trump to offer, because we all know that Iran isn't actually trying to build nuclear weapons. any more than Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, any more than Assad was gassing his own Alawite supporters with sarin gas. So Trump can make that offer, and he doesn't have to do anything to carry through with it. It's already a done deal. And it put Netanyahu on the spot, and Netanyahu has now responded saying that he's willing to examine the possibility of a settlement freeze, which means nothing is going to change at all coming out of that press conference yesterday. Netanyahu's still going to do what Netanyahu's going to do. And right now, the dangerous part is Netanyahu has a very personal reason to try and kick up a bloody war right now with Gaza and the West Bank, because he's looking at some serious corruption charges by his own government that could remove him from office. So he's definitely a wild card right now. Now, a lot of people are still talking about the assassination of North Korean President Kim Jong-un's older brother. And this is starting to take a very weird turn on the story, because they've now arrested 3 people, 2 women and a man. One of the women was the one seen on the security camera touching the victim, Kim Jong-un's brother, which apparently delivered some poison. She is telling police that she didn't know it was poison, that she was told it was just something that was going to smell bad, and she was encouraged to do this as a prank by the second woman and the boyfriend, who were not visible in the security camera. That is actually a pretty sophisticated assassination operation. And I'm almost willing to bet that there is a nation-state behind that. And obviously a lot of people are looking at Kim Jong-un himself, because the fact that his older brother was very, very publicly outspoken about what he saw as the shortcomings of his brother's rule over North Korea. So let us talk about the economic news. Janet Yellen has just acknowledged something, and the corporate media is trying to pretend it's no big deal. And that is that mortgage delinquencies are on the rise again. And we're basically looking at a repeat of what happened in 2008. Wall Street did not learn any lessons from 2008, because Wall Street did not suffer any punishments or penalties for what they did, except for AIG. They went out of business. But most of the pain caused by the 2008 meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud was dumped onto the American people with TARP and bailout and all this other nonsense. And that is a classic pattern in a fascist economic dictatorship. The people who get rich get to keep it. The people who lose money, the losses are transferred onto the general population. But that is significant. We're seeing a lot of indicators saying that we could be heading into a deepening recession or continuing of the recession. They're talking about, oh, it's a new recession, as if we've actually been in a recovery, but we haven't. Not with 90 million Americans still out of work over the long term. We never got out of that last recession. They just hoped you got used to it and would accept the new normal, and no, we're not. We know what's going on. Gold is continuing its increase in pricing, and a lot of people are asking, can they keep the momentum going? Apparently, hedge funds are going long in gold, and gold miners are suddenly finding out they can make a profit. Remember the issue about mining of anything, whether it's gold, silver, oil, whatever. If you can't extract enough of the targeted material to make more money than you spent getting it, then there's no point to it. It's called the unit cost of extraction. How much does it cost you to extract, for an example, an ounce of gold? And if it costs you more to extract that gold than the ounce of gold is worth, then there's no point in doing what you're doing. When gold prices are really, really down, the gold mines will actually shut down because they're losing money to do what they do. But there are a lot of people speculating that unless it's tampered with and rigged with, gold is going to continue going on up. Now, there's another article that came out of goldcore.com saying even though the price has gone up recently, gold is still undervalued. And gold is still viewed as the best protectionist investment by a third of investors. And if you have any investment money whatsoever, it would be wise, in order to preserve your wealth, to be buying small amounts, so that there's no permanent record, of gold and silver, coins and bars. And I will share you one insight from my own failure as an investor, and that is that gold coins will lose their value if you eat that chocolate bit out of the middle. So don't do that. The Italian banks are on the brink of running absolutely dry. They're having a liquidity crisis of epic proportions. Rome is being forced to bend the rules of the European Union in order to provide an emergency bailout. But what they're really doing, if you look at it, is they're putting duct tape on that gash along the bottom of the Titanic. Because the problem isn't the Italian banks or the EU policy. The problem is the very nature of private central banking itself, which by design creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. And the debt grows and grows and grows until it crushes the system. There may be times when the pain from the debt isn't that bad, and it feels like things are good. But there's always a payback down the road, and that's exactly what they're feeling all over Europe, from that European Central Bank, from the World Bank, from the IMF. It's the pain that we're all feeling from the Federal Reserve. Apparently over at Disney, they're not doing very well. One of their subsidiaries, Maker Studios, is looking at some drastic layoffs over there as well. One of the reasons is I'm old enough to remember what Disney was and what they produced when Walt still ran the place, and then later on Roy. And then management was completely taken over by people who hadn't grown up with the Disney way, as it were. And I remember Disneyland in Anaheim when I first went there. It was all these little shops with imported things from around the world that had a great deal of charm. And today, there were magic stores. I mean, there were all kinds of things. It was a real experience. Today, it's just like on Main Street, they took down all the interior partitions, and it's just one big, long shelf of branded merchandise. And that actually limits the amount of sales you're going to have from anybody visiting the park. Because in the old Disneyland, you might buy some mouse ears, and you might buy a book, and you might buy a record, and you might buy a magic trick, and you might buy this box of incense that was imported from India, and you might buy all this other stuff. They used to have a wonderful antique store over in the New Orleans area. But if it's all the same branded products, you're only going to buy one, maybe two of those. And I'm not surprised that they ran into some revenue issues. And the quality of entertainment product coming out of Disney, except for the Pixar studios, it's not really been very, very good. Now then, WikiLeaks is out there sounding a warning that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is not in fact dead. Even though Donald Trump has pulled the plug on U.S. participation in it, it's already being rewrapped and rebranded as the Trade in Services Agreement, and it's being proposed as a replacement for the TPP. It is much more draconian. It is much more secretive than TPP. TPP was originally very secretive, but it was leaked, and that's what triggered the public opposition. All the secrecy is because those who are behind these global trade treaties understand ordinary people would never, never agree to what is being done. Another very revealing article came out of Investment Watch blog. The euro has been a crock of bovine excrement from start to finish. How did we get here? And they're pointing out how the euro had started going wrong almost as soon as it was introduced. And they tried to get everybody to love it by lending it out at very, very low interest rates, triggering a borrowing binge and getting everybody plunged on that debt hook as hard and as fast as they could. And they've been suffering ever since. That's how private central banks trap you and make you their slave. They lure you in with the promise of low-cost money. Then they raise the rates. At the same time, they're lowering wages and salaries or other forms of income, so that you can never pay the loan back. The U.S. used to do that as part of their foreign policy in South America. Get these South American governments to borrow a lot of money from U.S. banks, then sabotage their industry and agriculture so they couldn't pay it back, and then use that debt to effect political chicanery in those countries. Anyway, got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, this immigration refugee thing is really turning into be an absolute disaster. in Europe. And, of course, it is not really being reported in the American corporate media, and for very, very good reasons. I mean, they're having these really horrible riots in Paris right now, and it's just ugly. Now, here is where it gets interesting. Soros and his people are still out there raising on a busted flush. Over in Cologne, Germany, there's a hotel. And remember, Cologne was the scene of these mass attacks on female, New Year's Eve. And this hotel is planned to be the venue for a meeting of Germany's Eurosceptic party, the party that wants out of the European Union. And apparently the hotel management are getting death threats that if they dare let this Eurosceptic party use their hotel, that the hotel management are going to be killed. That's real brown shirt tactics going on. Now, over in Great Britain, they're pushing ahead on the Brexit, and the European Union is still trying to find some way they can negate its effect, if not the actual reality of the declaration of a new independent sovereign Great Britain. And they're now trying to propose another restriction on Britain's leaving of the European Union that will allow Brussels to have direct monitoring on British finances for 5 years after Brexit. Still trying to find a way to maintain control. Basically, what Brussels wants is an unrestricted right to spy on all British finances for 5 years after the Brexit. What part of we want to leave are they not getting? Well, I think they're getting at least part of it, because the European Union is also proposing changes to the election system that would automatically restrict Euroscepticism. And the European Union is also getting ready to force Monsanto, GMO, on member nations of the European Union who want to remain GMO-free, like Hungary. It is a dictatorship. There's no question about it. It is a dictatorship. And what's really interesting is the European Union was first sold to the people of Europe as nothing more than a free trade, free travel bloc. That was the original European Union. We're going to say this is now the border of the EU, and within the EU we're all going to use the same common currency. And you'll be able to go from country to country without a passport. You'll be able to trade anywhere within the EU bloc without worrying about tariffs or customs or anything like that, which sounded like a really good idea. But Brussels then began to mutate like this metastasizing cancer, grabbing more and more power and authority. And the latest call, of course, is for the federalization of the European Union, where all the member nations are reduced to merely being states, like the current setup in the United States, with Brussels being their equivalent of Washington, D.C. And they don't want to have anything to do with that. A lot of videos coming on out about these Paris clashes. Muslim migrant mobs are rioting under the Paris metro. They've had to put barriers around the Eiffel Tower, although they're not calling them security barriers. They're calling them decorative crowd restraints, or some other euphemism here. Apparently, migrant boys have kidnapped Italy's children's commissioner and threatened to cut a refugee center manager's throat if they're not given all the free stuff they were promised they were going to get when they got to Europe. And you can understand why so many people in Europe are having a hard time with this. Now, one of the things the open borders has brought into Europe are literally armies of criminal gangs who are in turn engaged in the smuggling of more migrants in against the sudden attempt at border controls there. And apparently at least 11,000 migrants have been found in the European Union with forged documents. And all right, more about this when we come on back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this article that is revealing at least 11,000 migrants have been found in the European Union with forged documents, the product of these criminal gangs who have come on into Europe as part of the refugee resettlement and then turn around and start creating these pipelines of people traffickers to bring more people in and get them around all the limitations and increasing vetting that is going on there. And even though they've arrested more than 1,200 smugglers last year, officials are saying this underground industry is booming. Remember that old story about the rattlesnake? The woman goes on out in the winter and she sees a rattlesnake freezing to death. She takes pity on it, takes it in, and the rattlesnake bites her, and she says, "How could you do that to me? After all of the kindness I showed you, and I shared my home with you, and my food, and the warmth of my fire." And he says, "I'm a rattlesnake. What did you expect?" Let's take a phone call. Tom in Utah, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, today on the press conference, I was taken back. Well, not really taken back. I was validated on my experience with the Congressional Black Caucus, and I just wondered if you were going to comment on that in your dialogue. I don't want to take you off topic, but I just wanted to see if you had a read on that experience with the response that Donald Trump got from the Congressional Black Caucus.
I watched the conference. I have to admit I missed the part about the Black Caucus, but two things I took away from it was Donald Trump's willingness to chastise the media for cutting him off, because there was this one person there was just trying to make a political point and get it on camera and on tape and kept trying to push it and wouldn't let Trump finish the thought. The other thing is toward the end of the press conference, Trump appeared very relaxed and very happy. I think he knows he got the better one of that. We're hearing from the polling companies that Trump's approval rating is still edging upward despite all of this media attack on him.
Yeah, I was extremely impressed with his delivery and his, how do you say, coolness.
Yes.
Absolute control. But when you get a chance, you might examine that part about the Black Caucus. My experience was I met with them, and my issue, of course, included the damage done to the black family or black communities by the illegal immigration. And I got the same kind of non-responsiveness out of the Black Caucus. So I just figured out that they're part and parcel of that same cabal.
Well, I mean, they're definitely one of the bedrocks of liberalism here. But I think most regular black people, law-abiding, successful black people, they're feeling they're being damaged a lot more by Black Lives Matter because it's creating a public image of being black that is not in line with the reality, which is that most black people, like most white people, are just doing their jobs and taking care of their families and being cool people.
Well, my takeaway from the Black Caucus interaction I had was they don't care about the black poor families, especially the poor. No,
I would understand that. I understand that perfectly. The people in the caucus, the politicians, are there for their own enrichment and aggrandizement, and it is a common feature of politicians. Remember, the curse of all political power is it attracts the very people who should not be allowed to have it. And that right there is a real curse on humanity.
Yeah, I was so excited, I figured of all people who would be enthusiastic about my disclosure, it would be the Black Caucus. And when I got there, it was like talking to a mannequin.
Yeah, I can understand your frustration. I mean, yeah, I went through the same experience myself. Well, I mean, back when I had incontrovertible proof that there was a cover-up in the murder of Vincent Foster. It's like nobody wanted to hear it. I took it to friends of mine at the TV news desks there in Los Angeles. They already knew about it. They said, yeah, we know. We can't touch this. It's our jobs if we talk about this. Vincent Foster, back then, 1994, was the third rail in corporate media. If you touched it, your career was over. And fortunately, mine was over before I realized what it was I was doing.
By the way, I was told that I was lucky that I was not found in Marcy Park after I testified in Congress, too.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. Well, I'm glad you're not in Fort Marcy Park. I'm glad you're still with us here. And we're going to let you go and switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing there, Mike?
Doing good.
Mike, what do you think a couple of questions. But one is, if this continues and Marine Le Pen becomes French president, which looks like right now there's a very good chance that's going to happen, do you think she's going to start removing a lot of these people from France and sending them back to the countries they're from?
I think at some point that's going to have to be done. One of the reasons they tried to spread them uniformly all over Europe, the same way they tried to spread them uniformly all over the United States, was to make it much more difficult and expensive to collect them all back up and send them home. But we've had past presidents who have succeeded in doing that for the good of the nation, for the good of the economy. And Eisenhower could do it. We can do it. And it may in fact involve grassroots activism to basically find all these people. The first thing we have to do is start. We have to enforce. Hang on a minute. The first thing we have to do is to enforce the existing laws that make aiding or harboring or encouraging illegal immigrants a crime. And that is one of the reasons why things are so out of control. We're seeing all these violations of immigration law, of existing immigration law. We're seeing all these violations of laws regarding threats to the life of the president, where Hillary Clinton was acknowledged by the head of the FBI to have violated Title 18 multiple times, and nobody's being arrested, nobody's being held to account. The upper levels of our government are a lawless enterprise, and that is a big part of the problem.
The only thing is that in France and Germany and places like that, these people are actually brought in as refugees. And I just can't see them continue to let these people stay. I think there's going to be some kind of, especially Marine Le Pen. I don't think she's going to accept this at all.
Well,
she's going to do something. And if the alternative for Deutschland takes over, the AfD, I think they're going to do something about it there too.
I think if Geert Wilders wins a month from now, I think that's going to be the watershed moment. And you need to understand that we've been sold this whole thing about refugees because the government says they're refugees, we must accept them. But there actually is, under international law, a definition of what a refugee is, and the vast majority of these people flooding into Europe and the United States do not meet that legal definition of a refugee. A refugee is somebody who is allowed into your country because in their own country they're facing imminent death or persecution for political reasons. And most of the people who are flooding into Europe and the United States, they're basically seeking better economic gain. A lot of them have been promised better economic gain. A lot of them are fleeing just to get away from having to serve in the military of their home countries. They're draft dodgers. And again, a lot of them are just people who are fleeing prosecution in their own country. These are not meeting the legal definition of refugees. That's why there should have been vetting. But just like with the illegal immigrants in the United States, the vetting was shut down because the goal is to blur everyone together and drop the national borders. And George Soros has admitted on TV, his goal is to get rid of all national borders and have a single planet with a single government and a single private central bank holding us all enslaved.
It's not only George Soros, it's this guy, it's the whole New World Order. It's this Peter Sutherland in Europe. He also said, they make no bones about it. They want to eliminate the nation state, and they want to flood Europe and the United States with people that don't belong there. But what they're not counting on is this. Thank God for Russia. Russia is not caving into this. They're a rock standing against the New World Order. Putin has made it very clear that he's not going to take it from them. And as far as the United States goes, even if Trump starts capitulating and gives in, thank God we have the Second Amendment. And if they start raping our women like they're doing in Europe to the German and Swedish and other like that, we'll start blowing their heads off. Plain and simple. We're not going to take that kind of stuff in the United States. Even if the government doesn't think about it, people will.
One of the sickest things we're seeing in Europe is this idea that they're going to tolerate a culture of rape in order to prove that they're accepting of the refugees and their different ways of thinking. And what's amazing to me here in the United States is the very same liberal agenda that wants all these illegals and refugees to come on in and is willing to put up with this idea that it does in fact lead to sexual assaults on women, still have the agenda that women should not have the means to defend themselves. And it basically that contrast right there tells you they're tied up with their ideology. They're fanatically in love with their ideology. They don't care if ordinary people are being hurt. It's a small price to pay for that dream of the grand global empire. And I hate to keep going on back to this issue, but the core failure of liberalism is their religious belief that ultimately all aspects of human behavior and thought can be controlled from outside. And it never works, and it's why liberalism keeps making these horrendous mistakes time after time after time, because it's all based on an intellectual fraud. That book, Coming of Age in Samoa, by Margaret Mead, who is still lionized by the liberal establishment, and the book was a complete fraud. It was a book written to support that liberal idea that total control over the environment by the government will result in total control over the thoughts and contents of the brains inside it. And it doesn't work that way. It denies the fact that a large part of our mental makeup comes from instinct that we inherit from our parents. And that's why they keep goofing up all the time.
Well, I don't think these people are really liberal. I think these are radical kind of Bolsheviks. And,
I think you're right. I think you're right. And that ties in with something I said before, which is that back in the 1960s, liberals really did represent the intellectual elite of our society. But since then, anybody who's insecure about their IQ or their education, all they have to do is say, well, I'm a liberal, and therefore, by default, I'm intellectually superior to you. And what we have now is a generation of people who are actually arrogant in their ignorance. And that was demonstrated to me recently in a discussion with a friend of Claire's and mine who was a Hillary Clinton supporter. And her attitude very clearly was, if she didn't already know it, it wasn't important to know. And she was just completely walled off against anything else coming on in and disturbing her little fairy tale existence.
Well, we do have true liberals, though, today still, too. And not many, but and one is, I believe, in your state there, Tulsi Gabbard. Another one is the guy she went with to Syria, and that's, what the heck is his name now?
Kucinich? Yeah, Kucinich.
Okay, these are true liberals. These are real liberals. These are not Bolsheviks. These are not people that want to totally control everything.
Mm-hmm.
They're not looking to start wars. They're not globalists. They are true patriotic liberals.
Yes.
And you do have them. Problem is, there's not that many of them anymore. The Democratic Party has been taken over basically by Bolsheviks. FDR, Harry Truman, JFK, they wouldn't anywhere today in today's Democratic Party.
No, they wouldn't.
They'd be considered, right-wingers, some kind of right-wing fanatics. This is the problem. This is what people got to understand. And I think it's the same thing in Europe too. These people are not, who are running Europe today. They're not even socialists anymore. These are radical Marxists who want one world, kind of Trotskyites. Because I think Trotsky was the Russian thinker, if you want to call him that wanted a one-world government. I don't think Stalin, I believe, was more patriotic towards Russia, and I'm not sure about Lenin. But Trotsky, definitely a globalist, and a lot of the people today following both the neocons and the radical left are followers of Trotsky.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. A one-world government is a wonderful idea in theory. It sounds very romantic, a single planet at peace, and it's common fodder for a lot of science fiction writing about a single global government. But it always ignores that ugly reality of human nature itself, which is that we are not dominated by our environment totally. That we still carry with us some instincts from long ago, and some of them are not good instincts, I will grant you that, but you're not going to get rid of them by painting the walls a different color. Anything taken to the extreme is going to be a bad situation, and the real problem, of course, again, is politics attracts the very kind of people who should not be allowed to have that kind of power. And the more attractive a position of power is, the greater the evil those who want that position of power are going to do. I mean, you don't see somebody who's running to be a city councilman assassinating their competition. But the higher you go, the more and more often you do see that. where, again, there's a lot of wet work that was going on around the Bill Clinton administration. We're starting to see, sadly, a lot more wet work happening right now. What happens when you have a single golden throne of planet Earth and everybody wants their butt on it? It's going to be very ugly, and there's a warning there, because those who are willing to do anything to acquire power are equally willing to do anything with it once they have it. And that right there is the biggest argument against a global government I can think of.
Well, when I watched the other day World at War, and it's Stalingrad, the Battle of Stalingrad.
Yes.
By the way, that's also, anybody who thinks that Russia be a pushover, even in a conventional war, they should watch stuff like that. And this is a documentary. But what happened is Russia had its back to the wall at the time. Stalin appealed to Russian patriotism, not to communism. He even got rid of the Internationale and brought in a Soviet national anthem that sounds like today's Russian national anthem.
Yes.
A much more patriotic anthem, and appealed to patriotism, not to communism, not to international, some kind of international workers or whatever other gibberish that, the Bolsheviks are actually yelling about. That's what saved them.
Well, because Stalin understood people do not have strong loyalty to abstracted ideas, but people have a very strong instinctive loyalty to the ground they're standing on, their families nearby, their homes and businesses that they can see with their own eyes. And that is a very, very powerful motivating force. And you're right. Anybody who thinks the Russians are going to be an easy prey, they haven't read their history. The Russian people, again, from their genetic heritage, these are very tough people. They're good fighters, and I certainly would not want to have them in.
They love their country.
Yes, they do.
They love their country. They don't like being up against the wall. I don't understand how people don't understand it. And this is without nukes. It's a localized war. I mean, people just don't know what they're dealing with. And, the problem is nobody knows history anymore. That's the thing.
And we're going to go up against them with an army made out of people who have to knead Play-Doh if somebody says a bad word to them. All right, Mark, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I think it's time for a dose of reality over there in Europe, and it's starting with an article in the Express, no less. The European project has failed, and Trump's choice for ambassador to Brussels is saying it has become an undemocratic bloc, and that's absolutely true. What most people don't understand is the European Parliament does not really have much authority at all. They can debate and they can advise the European Commission, but it is that unelected, unaccountable European Commission that makes all the laws for the European Union. The Parliament is really just for show to make it look like there's still some kind of democratic process at work, but it's a fraud. Just like we're all being told that we have honest elections to convince us we have a democracy, but we know that that's a fraud and must be dealt with. But I think we're on the cusp of some very dramatic changes to the world. I'd like to see them be good changes. Obviously, the New World Order people have something else in mind. Now, I'm going to have to take back some of the bad things I've said about Ann Coulter, particularly in regards to her comments about a little radiation is actually good for you. Because apparently in a debate or interview on Sean Hannity's show, she was out there saying the United States is not the homeless shelter for the planet. And she's absolutely right. Now, I want to put a little bit of logic before you. Everybody's saying, oh, we've got to care for the refugees, care for the refugees, care for the refugees. Isn't the real solution to stop all the wars that made these people refugees? The same thing actually applies to the homeless population of any country. Instead of saying we have to care for the homeless, let's change the economic model that creates so much homelessness so that the 1/10 of 1%ers can have an additional bathroom in their mansions. We have to have an economic system that works for the nation and its people, not one that loots the planet to feed the addictions of the money junkies. That is the most important challenge we as a civilization face, to break free of the money junkies. Now, Chelsea Clinton is out there trying to grandstand and get media coverage because she's considering a run for the Senate as a stepping stone for her attempt to be the first female president of the United States of America. And as we reported yesterday, she's actually getting a very chilly reception from within the Democratic establishment itself. The Clinton name has lost much of its luster, and she may be carrying that curse forward. So Chelsea, after the station identification, you're going to love this story. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Hour number 3. The phone lines were open, 800-313-9443. So we're talking about Chelsea Clinton, who is now out there trying to get opportunities to get her name before the American public as a prelude to her attempt to enter public life. And Chelsea was out there screaming about this case of this woman detained by the Immigration Customs Enforcement and being subject for deportation. And, okay, there's some music going on in the background. So anyway, made a big deal about it. Then it turned out to be a huge embarrassment because apparently this deportee only identifies as a woman. It's actually a man, been convicted of domestic abuse, and he's been deported already 6 times. So Chelsea kind of goofed there. She just grabbed the cause and went with it, and it blew up in her face. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Mark in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
And is it okay for me to say shalom, which is both Hebrew and Arabic for peace?
Good. Go for it.
I want to commend you that your moral compass is far better than people who call themselves Christian. And I'm going to tell you a joke, and I hope that I'm appalled by the way some people misappropriate the scriptures. And I'm going to tell you, the politicians, they quote scripture almost as well as Satan himself. You can appreciate I'm making a joke there.
I do. Yeah, but
you camped out on.
But like any good joke, it's funny because we know there's an element of truth in there.
Yes, and that's the thing is that you can appreciate that the Zionists camp out on certain passages, and I was looking through my Bible software, and there's 7 times just in the book of Judges, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of God. And I'm like, I'm really disturbed by the way these people, they say, we're going to support Israel unconditionally. And it's like, well, if that was true of the ancient Israel that really were of the lineage of Abraham, what about this current one where Bibi, I was listening to Bibi Netanyahu, and you understand why I call him that. He said, these people slander us and say that we're not of the lineage of Abraham. And it's like, Bibi, that's the truth. The vast majority of Jews are Khazarian. They're not of the lineage of Abraham, and there's nothing slanderous about telling the truth.
I mean, look at the skin color. They don't look like they're from the Middle East at all. Okay,
and you're a Sephardic, and I don't know why you don't use that. And I'm like, that's fine. But I am curious about something, and I don't want to touch on anything. If this is how shall I say, sensitive for you, I'm curious as to what got you to become an atheist. Because, quite frankly, I wonder, I'm curious as to, were you raised with any religion that was something that disgusting that happened? Because I'm curious about that. Because the thing is, Keith Green had this song, and he said, but phonies have come and wrong's been done, even killing in Jesus' name. And he's saying, I'm not disgusted with those people even more than I am, because what little I know is infinitesimal to what he knows. And the one comfort I have, and I'd really be a lot more comfortable if they just saw the error of their ways and owned up to it and stopped doing evil. But I don't know how they can do that.
My opinion has always been that good people are going to do good things, bad people are going to do bad things, and both are going to often use religion as their excuse, justification, motivation. As for myself, it's actually kind of a funny story. My father was Catholic, just full-blown with the water and everything. But because there was no Catholic church, near where I was growing up in New England farm country. I went to the Congregational Church, and I went to Sunday school, and I sang in the choir for like 5 years. I got the little pin with all the year things down there. And then in the 5th year, they made me a present of my own personal Bible, and that was their big mistake because I read it. And I started walking into Sunday school with some very, what I thought, common sense questions. Where did Cain get his wife?
Yeah.
And after about 3 or 4 weeks of that, the head of the Sunday school literally called up my mother and said, you know, it's okay if he doesn't come to Sunday school anymore. So I got I got drummed out of Sunday school, and that was kind of the beginning because since I wasn't getting the weekly brainwashing anymore, I just sort of went my own way, and I considered myself agnostic for a while, and then finally
well, I'm not fine, but.
Well,
but that's where you are.
Yeah, and that's where I simply went through a process of it wasn't just an issue of belief in God, it was an issue of belief itself as a mode of thought, and I eventually came to see that as a form of slavery, and I worked to basically abandon it. Now, I'm not an atheist who goes around screaming I'm an atheist and I'm out here to convert anybody. I obviously do a lot of work at Claire's church. I'm her roadie for her choir. They all know I'm not a believer. We all get along just fine. You know, we don't get into arguments or anything like that. And to be very honest, my opinion is that the atheists who are out there filing lawsuits and screaming and all the rest of that are actually insecure in their atheism. They're not really sure, and they're trying to get others to change their beliefs as a form of sort of reinforcement that they're on the right path. And I think that's where that's coming from. Now, again, I certainly support that part of the Constitution that says our government should not be respecting any one institution of religion over another. But outside of that, if you want to believe...
Establishing, yes.
Yeah, if you want to believe...
Prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
May I finish my thought? Okay. If you want to believe in God, fine. If you want to believe in Cthulhu, fine. If you want to believe in the flying spaghetti monster, fine. I really don't care. Yeah. As long as you are not using your belief to harm others, at which point you're going to have a fight.
Absolutely.
Okay. That's where I come from.
Well, you can appreciate, you appreciate that when I say I'm an anti-dogmatist, what I mean by that is the only thing I'm absolutely dogmatic is I'm responsible for my soul, you're responsible for yours. And if I haven't earned your trust and respect, why do you think? It's not like, the thing that bugs me is some people think that God's going to look for their advice. Hey, Joe, should I let this guy in? And it's like, I'm like, God's not going to ask my advice as to who does and doesn't get into heaven. But the thing that really concerns me is when people go, and I appreciate 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test everything. And I have a real issue with neoconservatives who worship this counterfeit political entity that says, well, we are God's chosen people. And I'm like, well, church history is that for 1,900 years, the church consistently held that when the Jews, the children of Israel, rejected Christ as the Messiah, apart from the ones that said, yes, you're what we've been looking for, the Jews lost their status of being God's chosen people.
Okay, well, let me cut in here a little bit. First of all, this is not a religious show, and we do have other callers, and I need a bunch of news, but I want to make a couple of points here. Yeah. Most religions either explicitly state or imply that if you are a member of that religion, you are a member of the elect and you are superior. Certainly the Scientologists do it, no question about that. And so I really don't think that's really much of a factor. But one of the things, this is going to sound a little weird, have you ever studied up on voodoo?
The only thing I've heard of it is like that James Bond movie. So I can't say if I have, And so I'm not
that was a bad representation. That was a bad representation.
Well,
let me tell you. Okay, calm down. My radio show. Give me a minute. One of the things I thought was really cool about that was the adherents of voodoo had this idea that, God is really too busy to be dealing with me, and the saints are really very important. They got a lot of territory to cover, so what we need are some smaller bureaucrats that we can approach, and that's where the voodoo pantheon came from. When you go to talk to Baron Samedi or any of these other characters, they are your intermediaries to the saints, and to the Catholic God. And I always thought that was rather cool. And it is a very, very colorful thing. But if you don't use that James Bond movie to decide what voodoo's all about, because that's complete, utter nonsense. Anyway, listen, Mark, we're going to let you go. We got a bunch of phone calls here. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to go to Brendan in San Francisco. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I just want to praise the Lord for the Patriots Super Bowl victory, because we know the Lord had a hand in that game. Amen.
All right.
Mike, I called because I'm sitting here thinking, how can we show support for Trump? And I wonder, do you have any hard numbers on Rivero Rangers, for example?
No, I don't, because we don't hand out membership cards or anything like that. We know we've got a very large readership on the website, or they wouldn't be wasting time hacking it all the time. Unfortunately, RBN is not on Arbitron, so we don't really have good, strong numbers on that. It's all kind of guesswork. But we know we're out there. We know we're having an effect. But as far as supporting Trump is concerned, most of that is going to have to happen at the grassroots level. Not just the independent media. We can sit here and talk all day, but ordinary people are going to have to start calling their local media and say, we know you're BSing us, cut it out. We're going to start boycotting your advertisers. Ordinary people have got to phone their congressional offices, because email gets ignored. Faxes and paper letters are better, but just phone and say, look, we know what's going on here. We have the intelligence community literally in a state of rebellion against the lawful president of the United States of America, and just say they're risking a civil war, and it may not go the way that you want it to go.
Right. What I'm thinking is, like, I'm sitting here in San Francisco, and I know there's another caller in the area, and I'm assuming there's plenty the further we get outside the Bay Area. But it's like, it would be nice to coordinate and kind of whatever. Where I'm going with this is, I'm wondering, does it make sense for you to reach out to some of these other broadcasters and have like a forum or a think tank, something of that nature? Because we know that there's a coordinated effort against Trump, and it's almost like maybe we should start really coordinating for Trump. And I consider you one of the great minds. There's a few other gentlemen on the air that I can think of, or on the web, and it would be interesting to see a think tank or some kind of advisory informal thing with you folks with these platforms, and just try to bang out some kind of ideas in the short term. Especially with the effort.
I think if you, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of cross-pollination that does go on within the independent media. We're trading emails all the time. We appear on each other's show and everything. But if you really think about it, this radio show and its entire audience are a think tank, because we're out here throwing out ideas about how are we going to support Donald Trump, how are we going to overcome the deep state. People are emailing in their views and their replies. People are calling in with their views and their replies. And I think in a way you're trying to take that power away from our listeners and throw the burden back on just us in the independent media, when the whole goal of the independent media is a self-informed, a peer-to-peer communicating population, which makes it impossible for them to be swindled and directed and defrauded.
Right. I see where you're going with that, but can you imagine the amount of attention, like just say you and Alex Jones let bygones be bygones, and other high-profile folks? It's almost like a poor analogy would be like the Avengers or the X-Men or something, like these groups of people that you wouldn't normally associate. Mm-hmm. And I think it would draw attention to this onslaught against Trump. I mean, I talk to people and they have no idea what's actually going on against Trump, and they're just getting their news from these fake mainstreams. And it's like, if people really understood, Kucinich, for example, blasted the intelligence agencies, and it was the most refreshing, wonderful thing I've seen. And I went to my friend that's a liberal, and I said, look at Kucinich is going off, he's on fire. And they couldn't be bothered. They didn't even want to know. And it's like, I think we could shine a brighter spotlight on these nefarious forces that are acting against Trump.
Let me respond to a couple of things that you said. First of all, from my point of view, as far as Alex Jones is concerned, bygones are bygones. And I would have no hesitation to work with him on these issues of supporting Donald Trump. I link to a lot of his stories in his videos that are supportive of Donald Trump. So I don't think that's really a necessary factor. The other part of it is you need to understand that the number of people who are still relying on the corporate media to tell them what the world is a rapidly shrinking number. Remember, it came out just last week that the websites for the big corporate media outlets are artificially inflating their click numbers using Chinese botnets. Meanwhile, of course, if you look at the logs of the servers of RBN, WhatReallyHappened.com, the Corbett Report, Jim Goddard's, all of these things, and Alex Jones's themselves, the numbers are going up. We are winning the war for the minds of America, and that's why they're in an absolute blind panic. They just sat there for the longest time assuming that the independent media was just a bunch of fringe computer weenie kooks and we don't have to pay attention to them. But following the defeat of their anointed one, Hillary Clinton, now they're paying attention, and they're very, very angry and they're very, very scared. But again, anything that we can do, the best thing that all of us can do is just talk to our friends and neighbors. And yes, you're going to run into a bunch of people who are brain-dead liberals. And part of the problem is these are individuals who can never admit that they were wrong. And you're never going to convince them. So the best thing to do is ignore them. Just let them fade on off into history. And you need to develop that skill of detecting people who are starting to ask questions, and you need to be there with the answers. And you need to tread gently. You can't shove somebody over a branch. All you can do is stand on the other side and beckon them across. And because so much propaganda is tangled up with our personalities by intention, you have to just go one at a time. Don't overwhelm them with all the brilliance of what you know of what's really going on, or their defense mechanisms will kick in and they're going to lock up. Part of the art of being a rabble-rouser is knowing what the rabble is ready to hear and what they're not ready to hear. And you have to develop that skill in order to be effective.
It is a skill indeed, and I do not possess it. I've driven more people off with facts. But it's almost like at a comic book convention, you see all these wonderful artists and writers all in one stage. I would love to see that. What a spectacle to see you and Alex Jones and these other folks in one spot brainstorming and throwing out ideas. It would be such a spectacle. People would have to pay attention. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you very much. And, yeah, that would be a lot of fun. I'd like to see that happen. You know, I went back when I was in computer animation. I used to do the trade shows all the time, and I had a great deal of fun. All right, we're going to switch to Sherry in Fredericksburg, Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks. Yeah, when I hear you giving your religious views and stuff, I have to point out why I'm so in favor of your attitude, because I think the most important thing we can be is true to ourselves.
Yes.
With a heart and mind that's open to know what needs to be known.
Mm-hmm.
See, this isn't a perfect world. We'd love it if the people, especially our ministers, were perfect. It'd be nice if the Pope were perfect. But people can inspire us, I think. But the real transformation, at least it's been my experience, comes from within ourselves. Where we change on the inside, then we put out a different light. We get a whole new, different life back. Where there is reasoning and logic, you have to remember when people try to tell you how to feel, I think that where there's reasoning and logic, on the left brain, I have found that there's also the unreasonable and the illogical. So it's kind of a mixed bag over there.
Yes.
But on the right, if your mind's open and you have a good heart, we all know that. So you're fine. And I hope people will, you know, if they believe any little piece of this, that we really change on the inside when we're ready to. And the best you can be is true to yourself. That don't worry about Mike, you know.
Sherry?
Sherry? Yeah, that's just my opinion.
Sherry, do you know what you're describing?
What?
Wisdom.
Oh, yes. It comes with age. So I've acquired
Sadly,
a lot.
yes. We get
Sadly,
too late,
yes.
old, we get too soon old and too late smart. All right,
That's
Sherry,
so
we're going to have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We got 2 more callers waiting on the line. Still got a bunch of news I need to get to. I want to get to Oroville. Things are still kind of weird out there, and I'm very nervous. I'm very afraid for those poor people out there. who are in the way of Mother Nature and the politicians, and I'm not sure which one's the biggest threat. So we're heading down to this commercial. Also, we're going to be talking about, when we get on back, the change in rules in immigration may actually change the House of Representatives. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we're already aware that there is a huge brouhaha going on over the issue of illegal immigrants voting in last year's election, with the political establishment saying couldn't possibly happen, only the Russians can interfere with our elections. But as it turns out, the illegal immigrants are able to influence our politics in the favor of liberals without even voting, just by simply being there. Because when the population is counted for the purpose of establishing districts for the House of Representatives, the illegals are counted. And as it turns out, there is a bill that is being introduced. It's going to be a constitutional amendment, which means it's going to need 3/4 of the states to ratify. And it's being proposed by Representative Steve King. And it will simply say that non-citizens are not to be counted for the purposes of drawing districts for the House of Representatives. And if that were to go forward, California would lose 4 seats in the House of Representatives. Now, to me, this is common sense, and I imagine that it is only through oversight on the part of the Founding Fathers that this was not included in the Constitution to begin with. But I can imagine the Founding Fathers viewed that anybody who came to this country was going to be a citizen, and there wasn't going to be a giant population of people who were in limbo. But I think this is something that definitely needs to be there, because look at what happened with ancient Rome. They just let everybody in, everybody could vote, bread and circuses, and the whole place came crashing on down. All right, let's take some phone calls. Linda in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, how are you today?
I'm fine.
Hello? Good. I am promoting for the 24th of February, and I picked that date because it's a Friday, and Claire will be hosting the last hour of your show. Promote a National Day of Prayer for the people, or just positive thoughts from folks that don't pray, for our president, to protect him. And I'm going to try to contact as many alternative radio hosts, and just wanted to mention it to you, Mike.
Okay, and that'll be on the 24th, and I'll be sure and let Claire know about that.
24th. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'll call her, and I'm going to call the other hosts, and I just wanted your audience to hear about it and think about it and participate and spread the word.
All right. Well, certainly we'll do that. Now, I think positive thoughts about Trump pretty much every day. They're not all positive, but about 9 out of every 10.
So do I.
Okay.
So do I, but I think he just needs to hear it from us, that we're on his side. That is back.
That is very important, and that is why you should get on Twitter and on all of the various White House and Real Donald Trump feeds and post positive thoughts, because there's literally an army of people out there trying to flood social media. And we have to overcome the censorship that the social media is doing to try and block people who are praising Donald Trump. This is a full court Bex alert in terms of the establishment.
Absolutely.
All right, well, Linda, thank you very much.
Michael.
We're going to let you go here. And I'm going to leave the next phone call until after this next commercial break. But meanwhile, apparently, there was a professor over at Orange Coast College who claimed Donald Trump's election win was an act of terrorism. And apparently a student recorded that and put it online. The student has been suspended, not the teacher, and told to ordered to write an apology for taking what this is what they're teaching in the universities and colleges. Donald Trump's election was an act of terrorism. Is that what you took out $66,000 in student loans to be told? Aren't the kids supposed to be in college so they can acquire the job skills so they can eventually pay those student loans back? I don't think college professors in non-political classes should be allowed to be political. I certainly wasn't when I was teaching. I refused. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we take to the phone call, just a quick reminder, our fearless Commander-in-Chief, John Stadmiller, is finally dealing with his bug. He's going to be back on the air live immediately following this program, and everybody's saying it's going to be good. He's going to be doing a great show, so please make a point of staying tuned. After my program, you won't be listening to reruns. It will be live, and he will be on fire. Let's go back to the phones here. Rob in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, it's good news with John. I talked to him the other day, and he sounded really just terrible. But anyways, this one caller was saying about how to kind of, like you said, putting it back towards the network people and this about networking, getting together. But the thing that I keep going back to, what I have learned from RBN and all the shows that I've gathered so much knowledge from, is the basics of our country. And I had somebody, and I'm sharing that with people. John knows about this. I have a good base of people that are, I'm educating them by just doing what I'm doing. And then yesterday, somebody came up to me or was talking to me, and he said, "Do you have any quality, good news feeds that I could, that I would get some information from?" So I made a list of half a dozen of them and some YouTube things, and I said, the most important thing you have to do is you have to be involved. You have to educate yourself. You
Yes.
have to look, think, and it's so the people are out there, and people like me and people like that other caller, we are networking. We're all against the same challenge. This is a snake pit right now.
Yes.
Everybody agrees with you, Mike, about the fact that a civil war is looming very badly if they can't get under control all these, rats, cockroaches, and all the other, spies that are in the White House. And thank God Chavez is involved now to call for, an investigation. Start prosecuting some of these people.
Yes.
And they'll just shut up. People understand that we stood back and let Obama's government regime, however you want to put it, do what they were going to do for 8 years.
Well, hold it.
And
It wasn't just Barack Obama. This has been coming on for a great many years. Some of these executive orders that we're planning for a transition of our nation into something go all the way back to the Nixon administration. But it really began to take off, again, 30 years ago during the Bill Clinton administration, when we began to see this power play. We were hearing George Bush even back then talking about the New World Order, getting rid of the useless eaters. This is, Obama is certainly one of the players, but let's not drop the entire guilt on him.
The culmination of it.
Well, yeah. It hasn't culminated yet either. If it had already culminated, we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Well, I meant he was bringing it to a head, not culminate. The Hillary.
He was advancing it along, and Hillary. Yeah. He was
right. They understand the whole parade, that it's been 30 years of both sides of the same, two heads of the same snake, and and it has to be what it has to be. People have to get educated. They can't rely on anybody else. I'm teaching people just cognitive thinking. You have to think for yourself. You cannot rely on someone else's opinion to justify what your reality is. It can't happen.
Well, one of the bad things about Common Core and modern education is they are absolutely not teaching students to analyze, to think critically, to think logically. It really is all about indoctrination. We, the authority figure, the teacher, will tell you this, you will believe it and act accordingly. And this is great politics, but it's lousy economics, because our kids coming out of our schools are academically limited. and they are at a disadvantage competing with children of the same age in other nations in competing for these jobs in the global technological marketplace.
Mike, wouldn't you agree? The Communist Manifesto, mission accomplished, though. You know, you have the government take over the education system, and you retrain and you teach everybody to become Autobots.
Well, that was included as part of the Communist Manifesto, but it actually dates back to Prussia, what's called the Prussian model of public education. And even back then, the declared intention was to craft a younger generation that was of better use to the government, rather than trying to convince and persuade them as adults to get on with the government agenda.
Right. Right. Train them young and train them right. Well, sort of.
Yep. Grab them when they're too young.
It's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, the model is to grab them when they're too young to realize the big people are full of crap and fill their head full of a lot of nonsense, let their personalities grow up around those core beliefs, and then they're locked in place. It takes a tremendous effort of will to abandon those beliefs. And I'll give you one good example. Can you remember how badly you were traumatized when you learned there was no Santa Claus? Now imagine that same trauma multiplied across everything you believe, all at the same time, and you will understand just how powerful this enslavement to belief can really be.
Yes, and it really is. It's devastating to people, and unfortunately, I mean, I've studied enough of the psychology of things that the mind, obviously you know this, that the change is probably one of the worst things that the mind can't do. It doesn't like.
It's traumatic. Yeah, it's traumatic. Well, one of the advantages of getting old is you come to accept that there's going to be change, and you might as well get used to it. Anyway, listen, Rob, we're going to let you go. We're going to take one more call from Terry in Tennessee, and then we've got to talk about Oroville because there are some issues developing there. Terry, what is on your mind?
Just talking about this Obamacare thing. I have a daughter who's in the military who happens to be a doctor and told me, you know what, Mom, when you file your taxes this year, you don't got to check that thing, that box.
Yes.
You know, and where we have to pay the penalty. And we've paid the penalty. And it's not like I can't afford insurance. It's like I don't want it.
There are a lot of people who agree with you because when you look at those sky-high deductibles, the reality is that your average American, unless you have a serious accident or illness, you're not going to exceed the deductible, and the vast majority of people are better off just paying for their medical care in cash and not having to pay for the health insurance policy. But the current model in the United States has abandoned this idea of providing a product or service of value for a reasonable price, and the new model is we're going to create something that's absolutely useless, possibly dangerous, and then we will have the government force you to buy it. And that, of course, is fascism. And we knew when they came out with Obamacare, the same thing was going to happen with health insurance that happened when they made auto insurance mandatory. Price was going to go up, quality of service was going to go down. And the people were going to be eluded. We knew this was going to happen. We said that was going to happen. Anyway, listen, Terry, I need to let you go. I'm running out of time. We're getting to the end of the show. We're going to close the lines here, and because I got some stuff I got to talk about. And we're going to talk about Oroville. Now, you have probably noticed all over YouTube there are videos, both from small aircraft and drones, that are showing the serious damage that has been done to the concrete emergency spillway, which is resting on packed earth, and then, of course, the much more serious growing damage around the main spillway, which has broken partway down the hill, and the flood of water is now starting to seriously erode and undercut the soil that's acting as a buttress for the one end of the Oroville Dam. And we're still getting all these platitudes about, well, we think the dam may survive the oncoming storms. But apparently state officials are really getting fed up with all those videos showing just how bad that dam is doing, because the Federal Aviation Administration has now issued a ban on the private use of recreational drones and aircraft over the Oroville Dam emergency spillway. And they're saying it's to allow crews to work without interference. Well, none of the videos that I have seen were anywhere near the workers. The only aircraft operating in the area outside the private planes and the drones are the helicopters lugging those rocks over, and I didn't see any videos that seem to indicate a threat there. I think the real issue is trying to contain the reality of what that dam is looking at right now. And they're gambling here. And what we're seeing in the weather forecast is very, very alarming. And here is really what it comes on down to. If that emergency spillway overtops again, we could see further undercutting, because if that emergency spillway were to collapse, there's going to be a flood downstream. There won't be this 100-foot tall tsunami everybody's talking about. That would only happen if the main part of the dam itself collapsed catastrophically, meaning all at once. That would be horrible. But if that spillway collapses, there's going to be a flood downstream. Now, if you look at the Oroville Dam in an aerial photo or Google Earth, it's there in Google Earth, you will notice that the outflow from the spillways goes into the Feather River downstream of the outflow of the power station itself. And that is really where one of the problems is coming from, because all of that debris that was washed down the hill from the emergency spillway and the main spillway is now clogging the Feather River, and the water level behind that clog is rising. We got one report, the power station itself is now partly flooded. So it's serious, and given how many times we were lied to about things like Fukushima, that's okay, a little radiation's good for you. The Deepwater Horizon disaster, that's okay, a little oil is okay for you. If I were living in Oroville, I would absolutely not be gambling my own life on the reassurances from the state officials that the dam is probably going to survive the coming rains. And we all know that the long-range weather forecasts really aren't that accurate beyond maybe 48 hours at most. They'll have the week forecast there because it makes it look like they know what they're doing and they're in wonderful control. But we've noticed many, many times here in tracking the hurricanes that whiz on by our islands from time to time, there'll be a 5-day forecast of where the hurricane is going, and there'll be a cone of error. But that day to day, that far end is just whipping back and forth. And the same thing needs to be understood as being a factor into just how much rain is going to be coming on down. Now, my understanding is the immediate forecast for the next few days, the rain is going to be fairly light, but starting the beginning of next week, they're expecting very heavy rain, and that is a huge watershed that feeds into Lake Oroville and the Oroville Dam. If you are in Oroville or even downstream, I would be keeping an eye on the rain. Even the officials who have canceled the mandatory evacuation are saying maintain your situational awareness. Be prepared to leave rapidly if you need to be. They've already said people who have mobility issues, they're on wheelchairs and stuff, should probably stay in the centers, the evacuation centers. But I think they're trying to keep a low tone on this, and they're hoping that the dam will not collapse so that they can say, well, see, it was no big deal, and we don't need to worry about all the other dams in the United States which are seen as structurally deficient and at risk. And there are, I think, at least 8 of them. But I have a very, very bad feeling. I am hoping for the best. I do not want to see those people in Oroville pay the price for neglect on our infrastructure. But if I were in that part of California, I would have the car already loaded, everything ready to go at a moment's notice. Remember what happened when they did the last evacuation? They didn't issue the evacuation until an hour before the time they thought it might collapse. And that resulted in a huge traffic jam, which meant had the dam collapsed, instead of drowning in their own homes, they would have drowned on the highway, which to me is not really a vast improvement. So given the world of politics, given the world of trying to reassure you that everything is okay, that we didn't misspend your tax money on transgender bathrooms and supporting illegal immigrants when we should have been making sure the dam was okay after people expressed concern following that quake 12 years ago. So they're going to say, it's no big deal, you're just making a big deal out of nothing. And then when it happens, they'll say, oh my goodness, we need a bailout. Now, again, as I mentioned yesterday, the Trump administration has released emergency funds to California to deal not just with Oroville, but some of the other problems caused by their failing infrastructure, such as massive flooding. And it is rather cause for concern. Over in the Daily Mail in Britain, they were running a story where engineers have been using patch and pray techniques to keep the Oroville Dam working for years. And they're talking about their cracks in that main concrete spillway have been in the site report since 2009, and nobody did anything about it. They would just shut off the water and sort of paint it over with concrete solutions to fill in the cracks and not actually replace those underlying concrete supports. That's why that thing failed. It had nothing to do with the volume of water. When you're not actually replacing the parts that crack, sooner or later they're going to fail. And we're hearing this in the British media, not here in the American corporate media. Now, another report that we are getting from, well, this is a YouTube video, and it's on the front of whatreallyhappened.com. One of the workers at the scene is saying only about 8% of that hole that was gouged at the bottom of the emergency spillway is filled. And actually said, you ought to stay the heck out of Oroville until this is really, truly over. And I think that's very good advice. Err on the side of caution. And I hope it's not going to work. My concern is all the rock they've been putting in there. If there's an overtopping again, the rock is going to act like an abrasive and it's going to accelerate the undermining of that spillway. If that hillside underneath the spillway gives way, the spillway will follow, and it's not going to be good. Anyway, if you're in Oroville, think safety. Err on the side of caution. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So starting from the revelation that major cracks in the main spillway at the Oroville Dam were included in state reports going back to 2009. That's 8 years. And none of those concrete slabs were replaced. They were just painted over to try and make the cracks leak-proof, which rarely works, which means water's been seeping through there, washing out the soil underneath, creating voids, and it is voids that lead to collapses, whether it's a giant one like a concrete spillway or just potholes in the road. And now we have this story where apparently Washington Times is reporting California's Governor Jerry Brown has been spending $25 billion a year supporting the illegal immigrants and not spending any money on actually repairing the Oroville Dam. Just paint it over, make it look like it's good. And that's probably another reason they're trying to downplay it so Jerry Brown can run for governor again. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Remember, President Trump said there was going to be $1 trillion boost to repair the nation's infrastructure. Governor Brown submitted a $100 billion wish list for infrastructure projects in California to Donald Trump. The Oroville Dam was not even on that list. Now, again, I hope the best for the people of Oroville and everybody downstream. There's absolutely no question this dam collapsing would be an epic disaster. If it does collapse, even partly, that's going to be the end of Jerry Brown's career, or it should be. because it's not just losing the city of Oroville, it's not just all the people who are killed or who have their lives destroyed, it's the contamination of the agricultural sector in that part of the state, it's the contamination of the water feeding the freshwater systems going into Los Angeles itself. This should never have been allowed to go this far. If there were cracks in that spillway in 2009, they should have been fixed in 2009. Every time there's an epic fail, they go back in and say, oh, well, we knew there was a problem way back here, but somebody with their finger on the budget said, nah, we don't need to fix that. We saw that at the Deepwater Horizon, where British Petroleum had, the Deepwater Horizon itself, didn't want to spend the money to do the mandated maintenance on their manual blowout preventer for 4 years, and that's why that became a disaster. We see it happening time and time again. We're on the verge of it again. I hope that those who say this dam will withstand this next series of storms, and they're now talking a total of 5 separate storms are going to come on through. I hope they're right. I hope it survives. But even so, looking at that damage, the people of California have a lot to talk about with Governor Jerry Brown. And why is he spending their tax money on illegal immigrants instead of keeping them safe? Okay, there's our music. It's time for me to get on out of here and see what mischief I can get into for the rest of the day, who I can annoy, whose ox I can gore, rather. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, actually. The lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. We're going to try and rearrange the seating so you can see her. So we'll be back tomorrow, and aloha, America.